Welcome back to RIT Team Radio. We're here with Trevor Farah and Ryan Provencher to drift over to part three of the Firefighter Challenge, which previously we talked about just what the course is in itself, with the different tasks that are associated with it, the significance and role that it plays within the field. But then we also took some time in episode 2, in part 2, where we picked the course apart. We looked at different movements. We said, from a movement standpoint, how could you view this? From bioenergetics to energy systems, how can we view this training course? And then that leads us into this third piece, into this final piece of kind of summarizing everything up and then giving you these tangible options, things you can implement, whether you are specifically training for the course itself, where you are more in the competitive, the competition setting, or maybe you're wanting to utilize some sort of physical ability test, some sort of job simulation testing, and you want to be able to construct that at your agency or your drill field or something you can implement. So first things first, welcome back to the podcast, guys. I kind of want to start less drifting more into the content itself, but as an introduction and drifting you back into this segment, Trevor, what is just overall significance? What can a Pat, your perception of training for competition, what kind of role, whether it's role model or just overall role and significance, does this play in the fire service or in the circles that you're in?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think it's just good for health and wellness within the fire service in general. It's good for camaraderie. It gets everyone together, gets everyone excited. I think it's big all around for the fire service, and not just in my local service, but around the world.
Well, and then welcome back as well, Ryan. Looking more on let's say the coach's perspective, say on the training perspective, what was the significance, right? In part 2, we talked about breaking down the course. What's the importance of that to actually being able to observe the course, and then to be able to find measurements and kind of figure out where you're at?
Yeah, and kind of like we talked about last time, there's certainly a competitive element. Obviously, the Firefighter Challenge is a competition, and literally at the world-class level can be competitive for firefighters, but it's accessible to all firefighters. So if we really come back to what we talked about in our last episode, we talked about biomechanics, we talked about energy systems, we talked about physical attributes, we talked about assessment options for all of those, for any individual firefighter to have a better sense of their baseline fitness. And then what are your goals? If your goals are to be a competitor, you're going to approach your workouts in a way that is maybe different than someone that is non-competitive. So looking forward to digging into that in more detail today.
Right. And so we want to be able to provide you with these actionable items with everything. Yes, we'll look through what does it mean, the significance, and then some background information. But now we're trying to provide you on this third segment some tangible things, different action items, stuff you can take back to whether it's at the gym, at the fire station, at the drill field, these tangible items where you can start programming, you can start implementing training for yourself, for your crew, for your agency. So Trevor, I'm going to shift over to you and kind of just ask overview. Say you're prepping, right? This preparation for competing. Let's talk specifically competition. What does that kind of look like for you? Kind of give an overview of how you might approach your just training, whether you're coaching for yourself or for other individuals.
Yeah, so what I tell all my firefighters / call them athletes because they are, starting your off season, you're going to get strong. You got to get your big compound movements going, get strong, get athletic, get into the gym. You could be doing some, say, lighter circuits. I won't say lighter, less intense circuits. That may be a little bit heavier. Helps you just get your cardio going. So that would be your off season. But then once we start ramping up, we're going to be doing more sprint work. We want to get faster. We want to get smooth. we want to get explosive. So our circuits will replicate that. They'll be short, explosive circuits. You're going to be running at 90, 100%. And if you're not there, then we're going to dial the weight back a little bit. And so I tell everybody is we want to get fast, we want to get smooth, we want to stay strong and get explosive. And we run through that throughout the season. And that'll be in the gym and on the course.
Well, I like how you mentioned different seasons to that, right? When we're talking preparation, and I usually explain it on this think continuum where you drift in a specificity nature, right? As closely resembling the course as possible and then farther away from the course. And when you're more in the off season, you're still doing tasks, you're doing exercises, you're doing activities that help build components for the course. But from a specificity standpoint, you might not replicate exactly what is going to be within the course itself, right? You're not as specific. It's not as closely, it's not identical to what you're doing on the course. And then slowly when you drift more into in season and then you start getting into your competitive realm, like you mentioned, now you're drifting it in where when you're performing the course, you need to be fast, you need to be powerful, you need to be smooth and be able to have just the accuracy and be nimble enough to perform those tasks. And that's how you mentioned from your training perspective, you build these components first, then you start trickling into more of that specificity side of things. So Trevor or my apologies, Ryan, let's drift to Ryan now, from a building block. Let's say we're giving action items, things that people can start to incorporate at the station itself. What might be some tasks or just first mentality? How would you kind of approach building the workout? And then what are some things that can be implemented at the fire station?
Yeah, and so I think just like we talked about in our last session, you really have to be intentional about how you approach this. And we're going to put that into the context of just a specific workout, just as an example. So if you're a competitive firefighter and you're going to compete in the Firefighter Challenge, your approach to this may be different from a firefighter that is not competitive. And kind of coming back to our exercise science, we're going to talk about the SAID principle, which is specific adaptation to imposed demands. So when Trevor talks about training to perform at the highest levels, and he talks about the attributes that are required to include speed, for example, that may not apply to the firefighter that, hey, I just want to use movement patterns that are common on this course, but also apply to my firefighting. So Trevor and I kind of put together a workout that you could complete at your fire station. And there's two different ways that you could approach this. So if we look at the actual workout itself, we encourage certainly a dynamic warm up. And then here are the exercises. So you could do a shoulder load walking lunge, 10 reps on the right leg, 10 on the left leg, with the load
hopefully replicated on the other side. Right?
So you're walking right and left, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. You've got the load on one shoulder for round 1. And then you come into your kettlebell or dumbbell split stance row. So it's a horizontal row, 10 reps right, 10 reps left. And then you transition to your med ball slam, which is your hinge. And it's 25 reps. And then we go to the squat plus overhead press, and you can just use a hose roll that you'll find in your fire station for 10 reps. And then the last is a rescue dummy drag for about 30 feet. And so that's one round. Now, there's ways that we can control the intensity of that work. We can control the load. We can control the tempo. We can, if we decide to choose more dynamic exercises, for example, a split jump, which is a plyometric exercise in place of the walking lunge for the competitive side. This is just an example, and then you go through 6 rounds, each of those 6 rounds for time. So whether you're competitive or non-competitive, there's still value in tracking the time it takes for you to complete each round, and then you cool down with a comprehensive cool down, and that's your workout.
Right. And I like how you mentioned various ways of manipulating the exercise. And just as any traditional exercise, like you said, whether you're manipulating the load itself, you're adding intensity to it by increasing complexity, maybe adding a plyometric component to it. You could change kind of where the weight is distributed, right? Whether it's on it's centered, or you have it over one shoulder, or maybe in a suitcase carry on one side versus another, and so forth. You can kind of change where that load is at, so you can place a little bit more strain on different body segments, maybe the core a little bit more. But yeah, plenty of exercise to implement. Again, addressing that dynamic warm-up, which is always encouraged, whether you're doing exercises, whether you're doing a workout at the fire station, you're at the drill field, no matter where you're at, implement something, get your body prepped, get your body warm, ready to perform. And then also, kind of before we drift into more, whether it's getting onto the course, kind of talk about also the importance and implementing the cool down as well.
Yeah, and so as we're talking about, this is a very intentional approach to your firefighter physical training. In this case, we're using the Firefighter Challenge, the movement patterns, the energy systems, the physical attributes to build the training session. So we have a very specific list of exercises. The warm-up for that is obviously dynamic and specific, as we discussed. And then to cool down from that, if we know that we've used a lunge pattern or a hinge, or a vertical press, we have let's say yoga poses or stretches that we can use to unload that specifically.
You said yoga. I think that's going to throw some people off.
Right.
But is important. And I like to always say something when someone says yoga. It was interesting. I was, chatted with y'all and talked about it, but I was teaching at the academy the other night, and we were talking about flexibility, and I was like, what does flexibility mean to you? And one guy was like, yoga. And I'm like, okay, why are you saying it like it's a bad thing? Like, just because you put yoga tied to it is starting to sound bad, right? Just flexibility, mobility work. And in many cases, you'll do stretches and you're like, this looks exactly like yoga. Well, what do you think yoga is? So, right, being able to implement those tasks. But I also like the fact that you mentioned these are great examples to things you can incorporate, but you also defined, you're selecting them based on movement patterns, right? A lunge, a horizontal row, a hinge, a squat and press movement, right? We're categorizing movement. And even though, which these are amazing exercises to incorporate by any means, if you're listening to this and you want to add something to your tool belt, add these exercises, but also understand that utilize those categories and use them as a checklist. I have a hinging pattern, check. I have a lunging pattern, check. I have some sort of horizontal row, some sort of vertical press, right? I have these movement patterns in place. And use that as a checklist, and it's going to help you with building out your program. Now let's drift over to, let's say now, still in the competitive realm, right? Still prepping, still thinking in the competitive space. And now we're drifting to training on the course. So Trevor, on your side, let's say we're working with athletes that are prepping to compete. What might training or workouts look like utilizing the course itself?
Yeah, so now when we get back on the course, we might as well use the exact same equipment that we use in a competition, right? We'll use that as our equipment. So the first one being, we have stairs, and the stairs are in the course, so we can sprint our stairs with our high-rise pack on. It's 42 pounds. You're going up 6 flights. So if we want to just do sprint work one day, we can just do stairs up and down, or we can add in the rope pull. So we can go stairs, rope to down, and the rope pull is a 45-pound donut. And so then we come back down quick as we can. The whole time we're doing this, we're working on our speed. We're working on staying smooth, learning all of our footwork. We want muscle memory all the way through this. So a workout that we do quite often is, we'll call it front halves and back halves. The front half is stairs up, rope pull, down, and that's the front half of the course. So we'll run that through 3-4 times until you're starting to get tired, and then we'll move on to the next one. We don't want to slow down too hard, right? So in the back half, now we're looking at the force machine, so the hammer, running through the hydrants, dragging the sled, and then dragging the 175-pound rescue ready backwards. So we'll do that 3 or 4 times until we can really start slowing down. I don't want my firefighters dragging their ass to the course. I want everything fast, everything explosive. So yes, we'll kind of play with that front halves, back halves. Just do certain sections of the course to really get the muscle memory to learning it, or work on parts of the course that you personally might need a little bit of help with, and yeah, have some fun with the workouts that way. And
Yeah.
actually, this all could be done. It should always be wearing gloves, but I always make sure at least wearing our boots, use your bunker gear, and then if we're going all out for a heavy day, we're going to wear our SCBA and go on air.
Yeah, I mean, and getting used to getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? That
Exactly.
phrase, but getting used to utilizing the gear and performing in the gear, because from whether it's getting used to the load, getting used to the internal environment within the gear, getting used to the movement restrictions doing these specific tasks. Granted, I'm pretty sure most of you in the competitive realm are pretty familiar with your gear in itself. But with training, also getting used to at this maximal effort, actually implementing the movements and the tasks in line with the course itself, and just training in that manner. Even with that, right, and from a prescriptive standpoint, even if you're going out and you're training on the course, you're still implementing warm-ups, you're still implementing cool downs, right? It's still, even though if you're going to transition to the course and utilize the course, it's still that. And think from a bird's eye overview, you have some sort of dynamic warm up, you have your training, and then you have some sort of cool down. That follows no matter what principle we're talking about. We're still implementing that from a structural sense for your programming.
The warm-ups actually, like a dynamic warm-up for the course, is pretty simple. We could do almost everything on the course just with a rubber band. And we can start by doing some sprints, some upright rows of the band. You can do like a chopping action with the band. So it's a really good way to warm up for training and for competition.
Yeah, I think we can all attest to, if you have a pocket of resistant bands and you bring it out to the field, not only from a warm up, like you can wreck people's worlds without just bringing a couple of resistant bands, whether it's to the gym or to the field, whether it's warm ups or you do a workout with resistant bands, like if you haven't already, it definitely changed your life if you start incorporating it.
Absolutely.
All right. So talking about right, so we're drifting from that competitive nature and training specifically for the course itself. I'm going to drift over to you, Ryan, talking about, let's say, in those that are wanting to implement some sort of job simulation testing, some sort of physical ability testing, but maybe they're not prepping to compete. Maybe they're not doing it specifically for the Firefighter Challenge. What might utilizing the drill field and implementing some sort of job simulation training program, what might that look like?
Yeah, so again, sky's the limit on what you could actually do. In this case, where you are going to use the Firefighter Challenge as kind of a basis to build a firefighting evolution on the drill ground, and maybe even introduce some other elements that make it more comprehensive for us as firefighters. So an example of this might be in terms of the course itself, maybe starting with a ground ladder deployment to a second story window, just to go through that skill, coming back to the drill tower stair climb with the hose bundle, again, the rope hose hoist from whatever floor you end up on for the training tower. If you have a forcible entry prop on your drill ground that is more accurate, maybe using the baseball bat technique or other forcible entry techniques more specifically, or you could use a tire as a prop, or even the Firefighter Challenge prop for a forcible entry station. Coming back to the hydrant sprint with a charged hose line drag. And then, of course, what everyone loves the most is this rescue dummy drag on the drill ground itself. So the way we could make this more applicable is you are in full gear, you are on air, and we all know what it sounds like when the bell rings. How many times can you get through this evolution before your bell rings? And make note of it. And again, everything we're talking about today, whether it's your training in the fire station gym, whether it's your training on the course, your occupational training on the drill ground, all of it is objective. You can measure your performance as benchmarks over a period of time to measure your progress.
Right. And even with that, I know there's two sides to it, right? From a training capacity to a testing capacity. You can implement this also, the exact same thing when you're talking about from a physical ability test or job sim, think training tool, you can then test it from an objective manner. You would just need to, if you're going to do that, just set specific weights or which hose bundles, what sections, and so forth you're using. Pretty much standardize that and make a specific. This is the set of equipment I'm utilizing, just like the Firefighter Challenge, right? There's specific equipment being utilized. Same thing with job sim and physical ability, whether it's from a training tool, but now you're testing. Standardize it. If I'm going up flights of stairs, I'm using specifically, this bundle. If I am doing any kind of kneeling hose pull, that's this many sections, it's this type of hose. If I'm doing a drag or whatever, right? The dummy drag, this amount of weight, set that, and then set a distance to that, tie a specific distance to it. It could be based off of the sections of hose. For instance, one of the PATs I have in the academy they're doing a kneeling hose pull, and they'll have 3 sections of hose, and then they'll pull it to where 2 sections pass, right? And they'll still have the third one that's still stretched out, but they'll pull at least 2 into them. And that's just what we cut off that task at, and then they'll get up and then move on to the next task. So at least providing some sort of objective and some sort of measurement tool will allow you to have a baseline. But yeah, like we've talked about, you can do the exact same thing for training and just see how long it takes you. Do it for rounds, do it for repetitions. There's plenty of ways to manipulate this for either a training tool or a testing tool.
Yeah, and then coming back to a bigger picture, and as Trevor was talking about, in season versus off season, competitive versus non-competitive, what we're talking about today are these single workouts or these single evolutions, just to put this into context. But you take a step back from that, and now we can talk about periodized training over maybe a 12-week period. And it's a similar process, right? It's okay, what's the goal for the individual? Is it competitive or non-competitive? What's the season? Is it in season or off season? And then, like we've talked about in the past, we just really break it down to make sure that the physical training is specific to meet the goals of the athlete, but also comprehensive to ensure that we're accounting for proper recovery and things of that nature.
So, and just to add and kind of frame this in a very overview context, and starting with you, Trevor, let's say someone is approaching training. What are some, and we briefly mentioned some kind of measurements. We talked about some of the tests we do. What are a couple of tests someone could do next week before they start their training program? What are some of the things, I guess, either you do or you have some individuals do to just figure out where they're at before they start?
My first one is always my 8-minute run. We talked about it before.
Yeah.
That's I won't go over it completely, but we'll see how far they get in that run. But I could just put together just a really simple circuit that is going to mimic combat challenge tasks, and we could run through it. Maybe give them a 3-minute window. Actually, you should be doing this all in less than 2 minutes. So let's call it a 2-minute window. You have to finish this in 2 minutes, see where they're at, or do as many rounds as possible. There's lots of different circuits we can put together to test somebody to see where we should be starting.
And then you, Ryan, before someone starts this, before someone implements any form of, let's say, whether it's for the challenge itself, or let's talk about incumbents trying to implement this as a training tool, what are some things they should be able to do or know before even approaching this training, right? Before they start their first training bout, what are some things to consider?
Well, and to me, it always begins with baseline fitness. And when you talk about testing, I just want to reiterate for firefighters out there, testing is not meant to be a bad word. All we're doing is collecting information objectively. There's never any negative intent around this. It's just, hey, what's the baseline for the individual? And then how do we monitor progress over time? How do we set goals that are appropriate based on baseline fitness? So like we talked about, I feel like we could do a general fitness assessment that really similar to what the IAFF recommends for aerobic capacity, muscular strength and endurance, flexibility and mobility. Those are really important numbers to have as a baseline before engaging in a periodized physical training program, because that'll help in our goal setting, and it'll help us better support each individual athlete, whether that's with, corrective exercises or maybe noting any limitation in a specific movement pattern and offering alternatives. So as much as we can generalize things based on some of these principles, we can do that. But the more specific we can get based on objective information for each individual, that really helps us to support the individual much better.
One, it resonated with me when you talked about, and the first thing was having a foundation of fitness before going job specific, right? And in many cases, especially talking, let's say, academy setting, because that's usually first perception, at least in the field of fitness associated with the profession. And even with that, the first couple of weeks are, hey, let's make sure you can move. Let's make sure you can do very foundational. You can hinge, you can press, you can row, you can lunge. Let's make sure you have that foundation. Maybe add in, some plyometrics, something to be able to absorb impact and resist different types of forces. And then let's implement job-specific testing or training, right? Implementing a drill field training. So having that foundation first. Trevor, on your side, from a competitive nature standpoint, is there kind of and I know it depends is kind of the best answer for everything, but is there kind of a time frame? We mentioned off season, in season. What does preparation timeline? Let's say someone wants to implement everything we've talked about in this episode. How long or how much time? When should someone start training for an upcoming competition?
I think, it depends. Depends on your
That's
foundation,
the best answer
right?
always.
I think the season it rolls. So I think throughout the winter, you should be working on your foundation. You should be starting as soon as the last season ended. So the season usually ends October. Let's call it November, December. You're getting back on the horse again, and then come say March, April, you're starting to prep for your first couple of races. And then throughout the summer, through July, August, September, October now, you're trying to ramp up to peak for October. So it's an all year cycle. It never ends.
It never ends. You keep rolling from the last competition. That's it. You already started your prep and everything.
Yeah, I think if you want to be the best, you're not going to stop training.
So I'll stay with you on this one. Closing remarks, any kind of takeaways, whether it's a highlight point or just consideration when people are implementing this into their training program?
Well, I always go back to smooth as fast. And I think as far as just from a competition standpoint, learning the course, learning every single step, every single inch of the course. You want that muscle memory. But then from a training perspective, it takes time. It takes years and years and years to build up to be able to endure this pain and push yourself that hard and learn everything you need to be doing. But just take your time and just be patient.
Take time. Smooth as fast.
Smooth as fast.
Drifting over back to you, Ryan. Closing remarks, whether it's highlighting or even other considerations prior to implementing this into their training.
Well, and I think we come back to what you and I talk about so much is just being intentional about your firefighter physical and training, recognizing that, the performance that you set in terms of your goals for your performance, rather, in your firefighting, whether it's at a world-class competitive level like Trevor, or just to really perform your job at the highest level, it starts with being intentional about your training and kind of summarizing what we talked about today. Coming back to, what movement patterns are important, what energy systems are you looking at, and without really overcomplicating it, just having a specific workout program that's also comprehensive in nature.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate y'all being able to join again and just continue this collaboration discussions. I mean, this is part 3 of our 3-part series. Hopefully everyone's trickled through first part, second part. Now we're just bringing everything together and giving you those items that you can implement into your training. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate y'all listening and following throughout this 3-part. I'm excited. Next one, we're going to be talking and drifting more toward what does it mean on the tactical athlete side. If we label tactical athlete, what does that mean? Why should we focus in that manner? And then are there pros and cons to that? So join us for our next series discussing the tactical athlete.